Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz harmonica and vibraphone player Hendrik Meurkens. He grew up in Germany and made his way to America to study at the Berklee College of Music. He just released a new straight-ahead jazz album, 2016's Harmonicus Rex. But he has a deep affection for Latin jazz after spending some quality time in the 80s in Rio in that samba and bossa nova environment. He's gigged with legends over the years, many of them, like Charlie Byrd, Jimmy Cobb, Monty Alexander. His story in jazz is very textured and interesting. So please, dig this interview, my friends.
Hey, thank you for taking some time to talk with me today. I appreciate it.
Let's do this.
Right on. So let me get an idea. I know on your website you're pretty clear about your activity, but in your own words, give me an overview, kind of a short and condensed version of what's going on in your world these days.
Well, okay, so I would say that after having done Brazilian stuff almost exclusively for probably 15 years or so, I finally have a jazz album out again this year here, Harmonicus Rex with Jimmy Cobb. And that's a little bit of a shift because I've been doing the Brazilian jazz thing for so long and it felt so comfortable and people liked it so much that I almost forgot that I'm actually, firstly, a straight-ahead player. So I put that out and looky, people like it and that's interesting. So I'm adding that to my activities now. The Brazilian thing will never die because it's kind of a no-brainer for my instrument. Harmonica is just very comfortable in that context. But it's also good that I'm back on doing some straight-ahead stuff because that's really how it all started. And on the performance thing, things always shift. You know, sometimes I go a lot to the Far East or to Russia. This year seems to be more American activities. It always depends where they want me, but I'm always one step away from the airport. Hey, that's a good line. I like that.
So let me ask you about this latest album, Copa Village. How did this come about, and how do you feel about the Afterglow? It's getting great reviews, but how do you feel?
But that's not the last album. Copa Village is the album with Antonio Adolfo that came out last year. The new one is called Harmonicus Rex. That's
okay.
That's the straight ahead. But which one do you want to talk about? Because there are 3 albums out that we can talk about. They're all kind of new. Which one is the one that you have on your table there?
Let's do the Copa Village. That's the latest one that I had on my radar. But I also want to talk about your very latest album as well.
All right, so Copa Village, that is a collaboration with Antonio Adolfo and Carlos Saboya. They're both Brazilians that spend a lot of time in the U.S., and that is my Brazilian side. And Antonio Adolfo arranged it. He's a great arranger. He has a long history in Brazilian music. He's actually a first generation guy when, Bossa Nova was created there in Rio. And it's a 3-leader thing. We all bring in our own whatever. Carol is the singer. I bring in a few tunes. I play harmonica, and Antonio is doing the arrangement and plays piano. And yeah, that is my most Brazilian album because it was arranged and produced by Brazilians.
So this latest album that you put out that you said is more traditional. Talk to me about this album.
The new album is a real straight-ahead album. It has Jimmy Cobb, of course, Miles Davis drummer, who's one of the great drummers in jazz, and he's now in his mid-80s or something, but it's like Roy Haynes. He never scales down. He plays great as always. And I love his playing so much because it is, for me, the essence of jazz drumming. It's no ego. It's not about chops. It's not about showing your technique. It's just about swinging, and I don't think there's anybody who does it as well as he does. And I always think you should grab the guys as long as they are around, the first generation players. I also played with Herb Ellis and with Mandel Lowe and, a lot of Monty Alexander, all these dudes that were around when it was created, and there is a lesson to be learned. It's like the disciples and Jesus. It's nice to have it, in the Bible 2,000 years old, but it would be much better to have it first-hand information. And if you're able to catch the original players, it's just a great thing. So that's that. That is a straight-ahead album.
Right on. Let me get an idea of your roots and your beginnings in Germany. Where did you grow up, and how did you get this love of not only music but of jazz?
I'm from Hamburg, Germany, and there is no real explanation. I was not really extremely exposed to it, and there's really nobody in the family who would gear me to it. I just heard it somewhere on a record in my parents' very basic record collection. I liked it, and then I just investigated. It is affinity. I just heard it, and it felt like the right thing. It had nothing to do with location and nothing to do with family pushing me in anything. It was just, you hear it once and you like it. It's one of those things. And I'm not the only one. I play a lot with, for instance, people from Russia, Russians, and man, I tell you, man, back in the day, getting jazz information in Russia was, that was a major achievement. But it doesn't really matter, if you hear it and it's the right thing for you, you make all these steps. And I'm just one of those guys who heard it in another part of the world, and then I just, went the way like the Hobbit, and go on the long journey and figure out how it works and where it comes from. But I can tell you that most of the people who are serious about this from other places in the world, eventually they wind up in New York, because it's kind of like the cradle of it all and the temple of jazz, and if you're really serious, at one point you will end up here.
So let me ask you this. Was there a specific album growing up, jazz album, that you listened to that kind of blew your doors down?
Well, there was an early thing. I think it was Benny Goodman and Carnegie Hall or something. One of the very early one was Lionel Hampton. I remember that. And there was Lionel Hampton, because I also play vibes, not just harmonica. And Lionel Hampton, that was a start. That was a start. But it really was. There were maybe one or two albums, but right away, next day, I was on my way to a record store and looked into the next one. You find somebody on an album that you like, a player, and then you look for other albums that he's on or under his name, and it's like a Sherlock Holmes kind of thing. But I started out with swing stuff, the pre-bebop swing stuff, and then I evolved through bebop and mainstream jazz. I kind of did the whole history of jazz thing, not because somebody told me, but just by affinity. I just liked it, and then I outgrew a certain style, but yeah.
Right on. So what was the first instrument that you started out on?
Well, I had some basic piano lessons as a kid, as you just kind of do, because it's a rounded, it's considered a rounded education, like you play football or something. So you also have a musical instrument. So I played that. I didn't stay with it very long, but that was my foundation. So to this day, I see music visually on a keyboard, because that was my first influence. So I've had a little bit of piano lessons, and then I gave that up, being a boy and doing other stuff. And then when music actually interested me, then I got a set of vibraphone. I found that in Hamburg on a second-hand listing, and my parents drove me there, and I started. The next thing was the vibes, but then I was already serious. From vibes on, I was serious about music.
And then when did the allure of Toots and a harmonica come into your nomenclature and become a part of what you do?
Well, I think I was about 19, or pretty sure I was 19. I heard him, same thing. In those days, it was still all LPs, and I somehow heard him. There was not a whole lot of radio information about jazz. What you did in those days is really you go and buy a record. So I found that, and that was that. I thought, well, that's I like to do that. Let me try that. And I heard Toots, and to this day, Toots is really the only harmonica player that's really influence or interests me. I'm really not crazy about harmonica. I'm crazy about jazz. But Toots was the one guy that made it sound great in jazz.
So let me ask you this. When you came to the Berklee College of Music, what was that experience like to come to the United States, come to a premier music institution? How was that experience for you?
Well, it's the Berklee thing. What was more important than the actual school was the surroundings, just being with all these motivated other students. I went to the classes, but then again, I was officially a vibraphone major, but at that time I was already secretly and privately practicing harmonica. I'm completely self-taught on harmonica because you don't really have teachers. So I was actually mostly practicing in my little room and then going to some classes. Berklee, the school wasn't that much important. What was important were all my fellow students and, going to jam sessions and listening to music together. It was the environment. that was the big difference. I was a lone Mohican in Germany with maybe 2 or 3 or 5 people that have the same interest, max. But then when I went to Berklee, everybody had the same interest. So that was and after that there was no return. After being in that kind of environment, there was no return. I had to become a musician.
Right on. So from there you go to Rio in the 80s and you kind of cultivate your love of samba and bossa nova. What was that experience like?
Well, I always believed that you have to go to the source. If you like jazz, you have to go to the States and live there and feel how people live and all that. And the same thing with Brazilian music. It's nice to have the records, but it's much better to live there. And in those days, I didn't speak any Portuguese. I learned that while I was there, and so the communication was very basic. But, you see how people live, how they laugh, how they do this and that, and how they play the music, and it's always important to be in the culture to get it right. I believe that. There's a lot of information to be had over the internet and this and that, but it's not the same than living with the people, because then you really understand it. So I lived there for a year and made friends and got that virus. So here we go.
Well, and then you come back to Germany. And what was that like? Getting all of that firsthand experience, you come back to Germany. What kind of music were you making, and how did that impact you going to Rio?
Well, I also came back from Rio because I wanted to practice, and also I came back from America because I wanted to practice. I was inspired, but I still had to, do a lot of homework. You can listen to something and be inspired, but that doesn't mean that you can actually play it. So I actually came back home. In those days, I still called it home, to practice, and then I just became involved. I moved to Berlin, and I was a professional musician there for all these years before I finally came back to America and started developing my own little concepts. And I always believe that if you're a real creator, it's really within you. Location and circumstances are completely secondary. So I happened to live in Berlin, which happens to be in Germany, but my brain was already on its journey. So I did my gigs and I digested what I heard and developed what I'm doing now.
So you come to New York City. When you came to New York City in the beginning, what was that like to kind of be in the cradle of the world of jazz and to do your thing?
Well, inspiring is an understatement. You kind of are there where it is serious and where there are no excuses. It's really about how you play, how do you sound, and and they know after 3 bars. If you start playing, those guys with the ears, they can tell where you are, and that is the vibe in the city. You are measured every time you play in front of people, and that is inspiring and frightening, but it is the real thing, and I cannot do anything less anymore, because anything else would be a lie, pretty much. So it's inspiring, and it's just, if you're serious about it, you got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, over the years, you played with a lot of big shots, like you mentioned, Jimmy Cobb, Charlie Byrd, Astrid Gilberto. There's so many people, Ray Brown. What did you learn from being around such big shots? Not only in the beginning when you came to New York, but over the years, what do you get from being around creative forces like that?
Well, it comes down to this thing that I've already mentioned before. It's really about the music. If you sound good, that's really all that matters. And if you don't, nothing else matters anyway. So what I learned from the old guys is that if you survive and you become a musician, back in the days it was just because of talent, because if you didn't connect with the audience, you didn't have a gig and you didn't have income, so you would have to do something else. And these old guys are communicators, and they know how to sell their product, and that is something that I don't always see with younger musicians, because it seems to be more self-centered. The old guys are still playing for the people, and I think that's a very important message.
So what urged you to become a composer?
No urge. It's there. It's the same thing with all the other things. I have no explanation for it. I just know it's there. It will always be there. It was always there. I just need to do it. Composing is also a seasonal thing. I don't sit at the piano all the time. writing songs. It's kind of when the atmosphere is right, or I have a piano, or this and that, but then it doesn't take much, then it just happens. It's there. It's always waiting under the surface to come out. And in the long term, I might consider my writing more important than my playing, I think. But, who am I to judge? But this is kind of where I will make my mark. Although, people might not agree, but I think that's what it is.
Right on. So let me ask you this. It seems like the harmonica and the vibraphone are kind of two very different instruments. How do those two instruments play off each other in the way that you perform and give your music to the world?
Well, they are two extremes, but they complement each other very well. Each of them can be tiring alone the whole night, but together they are a perfect match. I think in jazz there are very few instruments that really can carry an evening, and I think one of them, or maybe the only one, is tenor saxophone. Even if you go to the alto saxophone, you're already in a territory where after a set or something, your ears start bleeding, But the tenor saxophone is the only one that really, really can fill a whole night and you never get tired of it. All the other instruments, you kind of have to use a little tricks, You have to work on the repertoire, or you have to have a second horn to make it a really strong performance. But if I have harmonica and vibes on the stage, I can do an evening easily and have something in the bag for everybody, because the harmonica is a great ballad instrument and can be impressive on fast stuff, but you don't want to hear too much fast stuff because it's not really the strength of the instrument. The vibraphone is a very visual thing, and is a percussion instrument, is rhythmic, is exciting for that, can also do great ballads. So, you learn over the years how to use the strengths of the instrument. So if I have both of them, it's a very strong package.
So we have a very strong bias here at the show with the vibes. We love the vibes, and I want to ask you this. What is the coolest thing about playing the vibraphone?
Ooh, I can tell you what the worst thing is. It's carrying it. That is by far the worst. That's the downside. Well, I don't know. I enjoy playing, but I can see from the reaction with people, it's a great connector, because it is, first of all, it's visual. It's like drums, you're moving. You're doing something. You're moving around, and people can kind of, with their eyes, follow what the ears are hearing. That helps a lot to communicate. But then again, vibes has a wide spectrum. If you can take the rhythmic excitement of Lionel Hampton, and then you have the ballads and the blues of Milt Jackson, which is big, fat, warm sound. And if you use all these things, there's a lot in there. It's a great ballad instrument. If you follow the Milt Jackson direction, it can be very exciting if you go the other way. So it's a matter of style. Also, vibraphone is a whole culture in itself. There's the two-mallet school, and there's the four-mallet school. The four mallets, Gary Burton and all of his disciples, that's one thing. And then there's the two mallets, which I do, which is more traditional, more horn-oriented. That instrument has a lot to offer.
So let me ask you this. Throughout your life, you've had a lot of teachers, or you've been around a lot of musicians with good advice. Whose advice have you really remembered over the years that kind of reverberates through your mind?
Advice, I don't really know. There are quotes, or there's a portion of the sentence that sticks. For instance, Toots said, I met Toots many times, and one of the things he said, and I never really gave much attention to it, but I can confirm it now, is he just said, you find your sound last. That's the last thing you find in your career. So I heard that. He told me that 30 years ago and said, okay. But now I understand what he meant. And other things are non-verbal communications. If you're on the road for 3 weeks with Jimmy Cobb or Herb Ellis in a bus, and the conditions are funky or not so funky, and, you're tired or not tired, the way they carry themselves, and the way they are professional in every situation, that's a message. That has nothing to do really with music, but it is music, because they know how to do their business. You don't learn that in college. I think jazz education has lost touch with very basic things of music, especially jazz music. Jazz music for me will always be entertainment. That for me, that's the idea of jazz. I don't think it's art music where you go to a concert hall and, have somebody on a singing saw, whatever, playing the latest avant-garde music. That's very nice too, but for me, it's Ray Brown and Herb Ellis and playing for the people. That for me is jazz. And yeah, well, if you hang with the big guys from those days, you understand. Non-verbally, you get a message. That's very, very important. Absolutely.
So you've played with what the world would consider jazz heroes. So let me ask you this. Who were your jazz heroes?
There are a few guys, I think, that overshadow everybody else. Charlie Parker would be on the top of that list, I think. If I listen to him, he can make me cry and smile in the same phrase almost, I mean, that's nobody, for me, has that spectrum of emotions. He can make me completely happy and I can completely feel his pain in the same two notes. So that's one of the guys. And then, the whole period of straight ahead, the Miles Davis rhythm sections with Philly Joe Jones and Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb and Win Kelly, everything around that time, Wes Montgomery, the happy guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. Why do you love jazz?
Yeah, why do I love jazz? Why do I love pecan pie? I don't know. It's there, I don't have a whole lot of interest in life, I don't have 20 hobbies and I like I just gotta play, man. I mean, it's one of these things, man. There are no words for it, but it's there. It's like a light that's just there, and it has not been able to be extinguished so far, and I don't think that will ever happen. But there's no explanation for it.
Right on. So, what has been one of the nicest things a fan has ever said to you?
I don't know, nothing verbally, but I can tell if people get it. It's always good if you get that feeling. It also depends on where you play. Russian audiences happen to be really great listeners. They can really make you feel that they get it, and then other people, they are there for different reasons, but nothing verbally. It's a vibe thing. You know when it works.
Sure. So you just mentioned your latest project is more of a straight-ahead jazz project. What other projects are on the horizon, or what do you see coming up for you? Are you kind of getting into more of a traditional mode, or what do you think?
Well, there are several things on the burner right now. I'm doing another duo project with the piano player Bill Cunliffe from L.A., and that will be a jazz thing, but just duo format. That's one thing. I'm sure there's another Brazilian thing coming sooner or later because I already wrote a lot of tunes since the last one, so whenever there's an opportunity or if there's a budget, I will do that. And straight ahead, of course, this album is out now. It needs to be promoted, so I will look for live opportunities with that, maybe having quartet and adding a second horn, like trumpet or tenor saxophone or flute, just to make it a more of a traditional setting. But it's all about my instruments in the wide world of jazz between mainstream and Brazilian. That's kind of the territory that I'm in.
So let me ask you this. This is my final question. When you're far from being done, but when someone sits back years from now and peels back the pages of jazz history and they come over your name, how do you want the world of jazz to remember your contributions to it?
I don't know. Maybe the world's tallest harmonica player? No, I don't know. I don't know, really. I don't know. I think my compositions hopefully will stay, but you can't really tell that, I already made my mark for the jazz harmonica sound that I do. It's been documented there for decades now, and that has nothing to do with fame or anything, but the sound is pretty much clear and established. If that is enough for people to remember me for something, I don't know. We will see, but I think it has been, if I listen to stuff from 30 years ago or 20 years ago, it's really not that different. It's the harmonica and the vice playing is kind of what it is, and the compositions are in a certain language, so I think the contribution has already been made. What sticks, we will see. I don't know.
Hey, thank you for taking some time to talk with me today. I appreciate your time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Germany, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Hendrik for his story and all of that music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.